A little girl couldn't speak, but one silent gesture to a police dog changed everything. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened that day was nothing short of unbelievable. A little girl, frightened, trapped, and completely helpless, managed to give a silent signal to a police dog when no one else could notice. And what that dog did next shocked everyone who witnessed it. This isn't just a story about bravery, it's a reminder that heroes often come in unexpected forms, and sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest. The little girl's silent signal was not just an accident or a random gesture. It was a moment born from fear, desperation, and a fragile hope that someone, or something, might notice. She had been taught to stay quiet, to avoid drawing attention to herself, and every instinct inside her told her that making a sound could put her in even greater danger. But she also knew that if she did nothing, her situation would only become worse. So she relied on the only option she had left: a small, deliberate, and carefully executed movement meant for the eyes of a very specific ally, the police dog standing just a few feet away. The police dog had already been scanning the area, trained to pick up on scents, gestures, and emotional cues. Yet what the girl did wasn't a typical trained signal, not something the dog had been conditioned to respond to during routine exercises. It was subtle, barely noticeable to any officer or passerby. She lowered her hand, fingers trembling, and tapped her thumb against her palm in a rhythm she hoped the dog would understand. It was a move she remembered from a safety video shown at her school, one that explained how to signal for help without speaking, without alerting the wrong person. But she never imagined she would need it in real life. She never imagined that her quiet, almost invisible gesture could become her lifeline. Fear made her movements stiff, but determination made them precise. She made sure not to look directly at the dog so she wouldn't draw suspicion from the person she was afraid of. Her eyes remained downcast, her breathing shallow, and her shoulders tight with tension. Still, she repeated the signal, tapping again, a whisper of motion against her skin. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious. It was the kind of gesture adults often miss, the kind of sign children make when they're trying not to cry. But police dogs are different. They're trained to sense distress in ways humans often overlook. They don't need words. They need only intention, scent, and emotion. As she continued the small movement, the girl's mind raced. She didn't know if this would work. She didn't know if the dog would understand, or if the officers nearby would pay attention at all. She only knew that doing nothing felt even more dangerous. So she let her fear channel into that tiny signal, hoping that somewhere inside the dog's instincts, there would be a connection, a spark of recognition. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she wondered if the dog could hear that too. She tried to remind herself of what her teachers had said, that help signals don't always have to be loud. Sometimes the bravest things are done quietly, especially by those who are too scared to speak. Her hands shook, but she continued. She kept tapping, slower this time, making each motion deliberate but soft. She shifted her weight slightly, positioning her body in a way that blocked the gesture from the person she feared, but kept it visible to the dog's line of sight. She didn't know that police dogs pay close attention to hands, the subtle changes in tension, the energy of the body, the scent of adrenaline. She couldn't have known that her quiet movement would carry far more meaning to the dog than she ever expected. The dog's ears perked almost instantly, but the girl didn't notice. She was too focused on staying calm, on keeping her breathing steady enough not to raise suspicion. She kept repeating the signal, praying silently for the dog to understand. Her thoughts blurred between hope and fear. What if the dog ignored it? What if the officers thought she was just fidgeting? What if her captor noticed? The risks were enormous, but the possibility of rescue, even a small one, was enough to push her forward. The moment she made the signal for the third time, something shifted. The dog's gaze locked onto her, sensing something wrong. The girl still didn't look up, but she felt a strange moment of connection, like the dog's attention wrapped around her. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, she didn't move any more than necessary. She simply gave the signal again, softer than before, trusting that someone or something would see the truth she couldn't say aloud. She kept going, her heart trembling in her chest, her fingers repeating the silent motion meant to save her without ever making a sound. The police dog's instant reaction was not the dramatic lunge or loud bark that movies often show. It was something far more controlled, far more deliberate, and in some ways far more chilling in its precision. Police dogs are trained to read human behavior with a sensitivity most people don't realize they possess. And in that moment, the dog sensed a shift in the girl's energy that didn't match the environment around her. Her small gesture, her trembling hand, the quiet tension radiating from her, those were signals the dog recognized on a level deeper than simple obedience. To the dog, something was wrong. Immediately and unmistakably, the dog's posture changed first. Its muscles tightened just slightly, a subtle adjustment that only experienced handlers usually notice. But the girl's signal had triggered something instinctive inside the dog, a protective response rooted in years of training. It didn't bark or growl. Instead, it went still, completely still, like a statue waiting for the right moment to move. This kind of stillness was part of the dog's language, a way of preparing itself to act without alarming the very person who might pose a threat. Its ears angled forward, its eyes sharpened, and its breathing slowed as it focused entirely on the girl. The dog's head tilted just slightly, enough to study the girl's fingers, her trembling posture, the way she avoided eye contact. Dogs don't need spoken words to detect distress. They smell it. They feel it. They track the vibrations of fear through small details, the way a person stiffens their shoulders, the faint change in scent when adrenaline rises, the uneven rhythm of a breath trying to stay hidden. The dog processed all of this in seconds. Its training told it that something dangerous was happening, and the little girl was quietly asking for help. Then the dog shifted its weight, a subtle motion toward the girl that wasn't aggressive but purposeful. The handler felt the slight pull on the leash and recognized the signal. This wasn't distraction or curiosity. This was the dog indicating that something was wrong. But the dog didn't wait for permission to analyze the situation further. It stepped closer, lowering its head to get a better angle on the girl's hand. It wasn't just looking, it was reading the tension in her muscles, the quick flicks of her fingers, the scent of fear she desperately tried to suppress. Its eyes locked onto her hand, following the silent rhythm she repeated. A human might have mistaken it for nervous fidgeting, but to the dog, it resembled the pattern of a distress gesture, one that didn't belong in a calm environment. The dog recognized it as a plea, even if it wasn't a standard training cue. Dogs trained for protection or rescue work are taught to interpret human signals creatively, not mechanically. They learn to combine instinct and training, blending natural empathy with learned responses. As the dog recognized the girl's signal as a call for help, its breathing changed, deepening and slowing as it prepared for action. Its stance communicated urgency. This was how the dog signaled that it had identified a threat or a person in distress. But it didn't break its focus on the girl for long. Its gaze returned to her hand, following each small, desperate movement. It waited to see if the gesture repeated, if it truly was a signal and not an accidental twitch. When the girl tapped her thumb against her palm again, even more softly than before, the dog confirmed its suspicion. Its body leaned forward, just a few inches, but enough to show that it had made a decision. It began to circle subtly around the girl, positioning itself between her and the person standing closest to her. This wasn't an attack stance, this was protection, silent and controlled. The dog's tail lowered, not tucked but firm, signaling focus rather than fear. It inhaled deeply, assessing everything the girl sent, the tension in the air, the shift in the body language of the adult near her. Each movement the dog made was deliberate. It wasn't reacting emotionally. It was responding instinctively, methodically, with the precision that only highly trained police dogs possess. It looked again at its handler, urging action, signaling that the situation was not routine. The dog's entire body had become an alert, a living warning that something was happening beneath the surface, something invisible to the untrained eye but loud in the language of fear and instinct. All of this unfolded in seconds, driven by a single, silent gesture from a child who needed help but couldn't speak. The officers at first didn't understand why the dog had shifted so suddenly. To them, nothing in the environment seemed out of place. The adults nearby were calm enough, the girl wasn't crying or shouting, and there were no obvious signs of danger. But their dog was acting differently, tense, alert, and focused on something they couldn't immediately identify. Police handlers learn to trust their dogs, even when the signal is subtle, and the handler instinctively narrowed his eyes, trying to follow the dog's line of sight. The dog wasn't looking around at the surroundings or scanning for a scent. It was locked onto the girl's hand with a concentration that was too intense to ignore. At first, the officers thought the dog might have picked up on a medical issue. Service dogs sometimes detect seizures or panic attacks before humans can see the signs, and the girl's posture did seem oddly rigid. But as they watched more closely, they noticed something else. Her hand was making that small, repetitive motion, almost hidden by her sleeve. It wasn't fidgeting, it wasn't a nervous tic, it was patterned, deliberate, and almost too controlled for a child under stress. One officer leaned in slightly, watching carefully without startling her. He recognized the movement not as something random but as something intentional. The dog stepped forward again, and the handler tightened his grip on the leash. It wasn't meant to stop the dog, only to steady it while he assessed what was happening. The dog kept pulling not aggressively, but insistently, as if trying to guide the officer's attention more urgently toward the girl. Its low growl never came. Its bark never erupted, because the dog understood this wasn't the moment for noise. The officers recognized this type of behavior instantly. A silent alert, a behavior shift that indicated hidden danger, or an unspoken plea. One officer crouched slightly to the side, taking care not to seem threatening to the girl or the adult with her. He watched the girl's eyes, trying to see whether she was afraid to look up or afraid to speak. Her eyes flicked quickly toward the officer and then down again just as fast. A brief flash that confirmed something was wrong. It was the kind of glance that children give when they desperately want help but know they aren't allowed to ask. That tiny moment, paired with the dog's unwavering focus, changed everything for the officers. They began reading the situation differently. What at first looked like a normal interaction now appeared strained. The girl's posture was too stiff, her breathing too shallow, her shoulders too tight. One officer noticed how she subtly leaned away from the adult near her, almost as if she were trying to shrink into her own space. Officers are trained to identify signs of distress without verbal communication, but in this case, the dog had noticed before they did. That alone made them pay closer attention, because police dogs don't make mistakes with this kind of response. The handler stepped slightly closer, pretending to adjust the dog's collar to avoid alarming anyone. From this closer angle, he finally saw the girl's hand clearly. The tapping motion was slow, rhythmic, and unmistakably intentional. He recognized it as a silent request for help. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a message, and the dog had been trying to tell them that from the moment the girl made the signal. The officers exchanged a quick look, communicating without words. Years of working together had made their reactions smooth and synchronized. They started a subtle shift in their positions, spreading out slightly to get a better angle on the adult near the girl. None of them raised their voices or changed their facial expressions. They didn't want to alert the person she was afraid of. Instead, they watched quietly, analyzing every detail: the adult's posture, facial tension, grip on the girl's arm, and the way he seemed to monitor her movements too closely. The dog moved again, placing itself even more deliberately between the girl and the adult, a protective barrier without appearing aggressive. The officers recognized this as another signal. The dog perceived a threat from the adult. The handler gently loosened the leash, giving the dog more freedom to act if needed. The other officers began positioning themselves so they could intervene quickly and safely. They still hadn't spoken a word to the girl directly about what they suspected, but the conversation was happening through signals, glances, and instinct. One officer observed the girl's breathing. It was shallow and quick, consistent with fear suppressed by silence. Another saw the tension in her neck muscles, the way her fingers shook slightly, even when she tried to hold them still. These small clues, combined with the dog's unbreakable focus, confirmed the situation in their minds. The girl was communicating the only way she could. The officers trusted the dog's judgment and their own training, understanding that the child's fear had been speaking long before they heard a single word. They continued analyzing the scene, piecing together the truth from every subtle movement, every hesitant gesture, and every signal the dog was giving them. The shocking discovery that followed began with what looked like a simple, routine question, one officer stepping slightly closer, his voice calm, his posture relaxed, pretending to engage in casual conversation. He didn't want to alarm the girl or the adult beside her, but he needed to test the situation. As he asked the adult a harmless question, the girl's reaction was subtle but revealing. She flinched. It was tiny, almost invisible to an untrained eye. But to officers who had spent years learning to read the smallest signs of fear, it was as loud as a shout. And to the police dog, it was confirmation of everything it had sensed from the start. The dog's stance shifted instantly, becoming firmer, more protective. It moved half a step forward, blocking the girl more visibly now, its body angled as if shielding her from potential harm. The adult tried to step closer to the girl in response to the officer's question. But the dog let out a low, controlled rumble deep in its throat, quiet enough not to erupt into aggression, but unmistakably a warning that no one should ignore. The handler tightened the leash just slightly. Not to restrain the dog, but to show he was aware and ready. The officers knew at that moment that something serious was happening. Another officer stepped behind the adult's line of view, subtly positioning himself so he could observe without being observed. He noticed the adult's hand, how it gripped the girl's wrist. Not gently, not protectively, but with force. The thumb pressed into her skin in a way that suggested restraint rather than comfort. The girl didn't pull away. She was too scared to make any sudden movements. She simply kept her eyes down, waiting for something to change, waiting for someone to help her, praying that her silent signal had been enough. When the officer asked the adult to let go of her for just a moment, the man's reaction came too fast, too defensive. He insisted she stay close, his voice shaking slightly with irritation masked as concern. But the officers recognized the tone. It was the kind of forced reassurance used by someone trying to maintain control. The dog stepped forward again, and this time, the handler didn't stop it. The dog's growl deepened, louder than before, enough to make the girl look up for the first time. Her eyes met the dog's, and for a brief moment, something in her expression broke fear, relief, hope, all at once. The officers saw it. They saw everything in that one expression. That was the moment the situation shifted from suspicion to certainty. One officer moved around to the girl's other side, positioning himself so the adult could no longer block her from view. The dog stayed close, standing like a solid wall between her and the threat. The adult's body language grew tense. He shifted his weight, looked over his shoulder, glanced toward the exit as if trying to calculate an escape. Officers are trained to spot that look, the recognition that the situation is slipping out of their control. They exchanged another quick glance, readying themselves for whatever might come next. Then one of the officers asked the girl a simple question. "Are you okay?" Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. She barely shook her head, just a fraction of movement, but it was enough. It confirmed everything they feared. The adult immediately tried to interrupt, insisting she was fine, saying she was just nervous, that she was shy, that she didn't like talking to strangers. But the officers were no longer listening to him. They were watching her. They were watching the dog, and both were giving them the same message. The handler loosened the leash fully, giving the dog permission to move. The dog stepped closer to the girl, nudging her gently with its nose, a comforting gesture meant to reassure her. It stood firmly by her side, refusing to back away. The officers took this as a clear sign. The dog wasn't reacting out of confusion or curiosity. It was responding to a plea for help. Another officer requested backup, quietly and discreetly, speaking into his radio in a calm tone that betrayed none of the urgency underneath. The adult noticed this and became visibly agitated. He tried to take the girl's arm again, but this time the dog growled loudly, stepping between them with unmistakable intent. The growl wasn't just a warning now, it was a protective declaration. The officers moved fast. One officer took hold of the adult's arm, asking him to step aside. The adult protested, trying to twist away, but the dog lunged forward not to attack, but to block him from reaching the girl again. The officers secured the adult quickly, restraining him as the situation escalated. The girl stepped back, trembling but safe for the first time since the ordeal began. And then came the discovery. One officer noticed bruising on her wrist, faint but undeniable, marks that matched the grip he had seen earlier. Another saw scratches partially hidden under her sleeve. The girl's silence had not been reluctance. It had been fear. Her signal had been her only voice, and the dog had been the first to hear it. The girl's rescue and emotional aftermath unfolded slowly, quietly, and with a fragility that made every moment feel heavier than the last. Even after the officers had intervened and the adult was separated from her, the girl didn't react the way some people might expect. There was no immediate cry of relief, no dramatic collapse into someone's arms. Instead, she stood very still, as if her body hadn't yet received permission to believe she was safe. Trauma doesn't always show itself in loud ways. Sometimes it hides in silence, in trembling fingers, in eyes that dart around searching for danger even when it is no longer there. The dog remained close to her side, its body steady and grounded, offering a kind of reassurance she seemed more willing to accept. She didn't step toward the officers right away, she stepped toward the dog. She reached out one shaking hand and gently touched its fur. Not with the excitement of a child petting an animal, but with the quiet desperation of someone trying to anchor herself back in reality. The dog lowered its head, letting her rest her hand there, staying still so she could feel that she wasn't alone anymore. That single touch was the beginning of her realization that she was finally safe. The officers moved carefully, keeping their voices low and their movements slow. They didn't want to overwhelm her. One officer crouched down so he could speak to her at eye level, asking if she was hurt, asking if she needed medical attention, asking simple questions meant to guide her out of shock. She didn't answer at first. Her throat tightened every time she tried to speak, and the words dissolved before they formed. Her silence wasn't stubbornness, it was the lingering fear that her voice might bring danger back. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting the adult who hurt her to reappear, not yet believing he had been taken away. Another officer gently draped a blanket over her shoulders, not because she was cold, but because the gesture provided comfort, a symbolic shield around a girl who had been unprotected for too long. She pulled it close to her chest, clutching the fabric as though it were a lifeline. The dog nudged her again, and for the first time since the officers intervened, a small exhale escaped her lips. It wasn't quite a sigh, but it was the closest she had come to releasing any tension. Medical personnel arrived soon after, and they approached with the same caution as the officers. They didn't rush her. They didn't bombard her with questions. They simply offered gentle assessment and reassurance. The girl's voice finally emerged in broken fragments, small words, barely audible, as she tried to explain what happened. The officers listened without interrupting, giving her all the time she needed. Her voice cracked often, and she paused repeatedly, but each word she managed to speak was a step toward reclaiming her sense of safety. The dog stayed within, arms reached throughout the entire process, lying down next to her when she sat, lifting its head whenever she grew quiet or tense. Dogs have an instinct for sensing emotional fragility, and this dog seemed to understand that its presence mattered more than anything else in that moment. The girl occasionally reached down to touch its fur again, grounding herself through that connection. The officers noted the bond forming right before their eyes, a connection built not through long companionship, but through a moment of shared crisis. As the officers gathered more information, it became clear that the girl had been enduring fear for far longer than just the moments leading up to their arrival. The bruises, the anxiety, the silent plea for help, all of it pointed to a deeper story, one she couldn't yet articulate. Her rescue didn't end when the adult was taken away. It began when she realized she was truly safe, and that realization took time. Safety isn't just physical, it's emotional, and hers had been shaken so deeply that she had to rebuild it piece by piece. When the officers transported her to a safer location, the dog walked beside her until the last possible moment, staying close as if it refused to let her feel unprotected even for a second. She hesitated when she had to step into the vehicle, glancing back at the dog with wide, worried eyes, as though afraid that leaving its side might somehow put her back in danger. The handler knelt down and reassured her that the dog would be nearby, that she was safe, that nothing would happen to her now. She nodded slowly, trusting the dog's presence more than the words spoken to her. During the ride, she remained quiet, wrapped in the blanket, staring out the window but not really seeing what was outside. Her mind was still processing everything, what had happened, what could have happened, and what had finally stopped it. Trauma doesn't leave as quickly as danger does. Even after rescue, the echoes linger. But the officers could already see flickers of change in her posture, in her breathing, in the way her shoulders slowly began to lower from their rigid position. The emotional aftermath was delicate, a mixture of fear, relief, confusion, and exhaustion woven together in a child who had tried to be brave in silence. Her recovery would take time, but it had begun the moment someone listened to the only voice she had left her silent signal, and the moment a dog chose to protect her without hesitation. The powerful bond between humans and service animals is often described in simple terms: loyalty, obedience, protection. But what happened in this situation revealed something far deeper, something that goes beyond training or instinct. It showed an unspoken connection that forms when a human in distress reaches out in silence and an animal responds with understanding. The dog didn't need words to sense the girl's fear. It didn't require a command or a cue to step between her and danger. What guided the dog was something harder to define, something that grows only when an animal is trained not just to follow orders, but to feel, observe, and protect in ways that even trained officers sometimes cannot. Service animals, especially police dogs, are taught to detect threats, track people, and respond to commands. But there is another layer to their training that is rarely discussed. They are taught to read the emotional landscape of a moment, the tension in a person's muscles, the changes in their breathing, the subtle shifts in their scent when anxiety rises. These are things humans overlook, but service animals treat them as signals. The dog in this situation was more than a tool for law enforcement. It was an emotional guardian, reading the girl's unspoken fear and responding with a clarity that surprised everyone. What stood out most was how quickly the girl gravitated toward the dog once she knew she was safe. Children who have been frightened or harmed often retreat inward, but the presence of an animal can bridge that emotional distance. The dog offered something she could trust without question. It didn't ask her complicated questions. It didn't demand answers she wasn't ready to give. It simply stayed beside her, steady and patient, giving her a sense of safety she hadn't felt for a long time. This connection wasn't created in hours or days. It sparked the moment the dog saw her silent plea and chose to act. For the officers watching, it was a powerful reminder of why service animals are essential partners in the field. They bring a perspective no human can replicate. Where an officer may hesitate, unsure whether they're misreading a situation, a dog can sense fear with remarkable accuracy, and once they recognize it, they commit fully. The trust between a handler and their dog allows these moments to unfold fluidly. The officers trusted the dog's reaction even before they fully understood the situation themselves, because they knew the dog had no motivation other than protection. The girl, on the other hand, found in the dog a kind of emotional refuge. Even after she was physically safe, her mind was still trapped in fear. She didn't want to talk to the officers right away, didn't want to revisit what she had just endured. But the dog required none of that from her. The gentle way it nudged her hand, the steady stillness of its body beside hers, these were things she could rely on without fear of being misunderstood. In that quiet companionship, she found the courage to breathe more deeply, to release some of the tension locked inside her. As the situation settled and the officers prepared to take her to a safer place, the dog stayed close, matching its movements to hers, ensuring she never felt exposed or alone. This wasn't a matter of training alone. It was compassion woven into instinct. Service animals form bonds with humans they help, even ones they've never met before. It's part of their nature to protect those who need them, and they do so without hesitation or judgment. That kind of loyalty is something humans rarely experience in such pure form. The officers could see how much the dog's presence mattered as they worked to gather information. Every time the girl hesitated or grew tense, the dog would adjust its position, offering a physical reminder that she was protected. This made it easier for her to speak, to trust, and to begin piecing together the fragments of her experience. The dog wasn't just a bystander. It was a partner in her emotional recovery, guiding her through the first fragile steps of feeling safe again. When the time came for her to leave the scene, she kept looking back at the dog, her eyes full of a mixture of gratitude and fear of losing that sense of safety. The handler reassured her that the dog would always be there for children like her, always watching for silent signals others might miss. She nodded slowly, holding on to those words, but the bond she felt with the dog was clear and unmistakable. Even without speaking, she knew that the dog had understood her in a moment when she had no voice left to use. The power of that connection lingered long after she was taken to safety. The officers talked about the incident afterward, reflecting on how the dog had noticed what they didn't and acted when they might have taken longer to respond. It wasn't just impressive, it was humbling. The dog had reminded them of something fundamental, that protection is not always about force or authority. Sometimes it's about listening to the quiet signals, sensing the hidden fear, and being willing to stand between danger and innocence without needing to be told. For the girl, the bond became a memory of the first moment she felt safe enough to breathe again. For the officers, it became proof of the profound impact service animals have on human lives. And for the dog, it was simply what it was, trained and born to do: protect those who cannot protect themselves, read what others overlook, and respond with unwavering loyalty when a silent voice calls for help.